You read people in seconds. You have never once trusted what you read. Carl Jung understood why you see what realistic people can't, and why the same faculty that reveals can also deceive. You felt the coldness before anyone spoke. You tried to name it, and they called you too sensitive, until you learned to bury your own knowing just to stay believable. By the end of this, you will understand exactly who is doing the seeing. You will understand the precise faculty that lets you read a room before a word is spoken, and why the people who demand proof are the most offended. How the same porousness that makes you accurate also lets the wrong people walk in. And the hardest part, how the sight you trust most can turn into a mirror, showing you your own buried darkness wearing someone else's face. For years you were talked out of your reality, dimmed to stay believable, sleepwalking through a life that no longer fits. But a healed empath does not see less. They finally learn who is doing the seeing. The realist is not seeing more clearly than you. He is seeing less and calling it maturity. Before we descend, here is the path. First, why the realistic person's world is not neutral at all, but quietly authored by him. Then, how your perception actually reaches a room before a single word is spoken. And finally, the turn Jung said you cannot skip, the one that decides whether your sight stays a wound or becomes an instrument you can finally trust. Stay for that last part. It is the entire reason this matters. You say a true thing out loud, not a fact you could print on a page, but a felt truth. The kind you arrive at the way you arrive at the temperature of a room, and the person across from you wants proof. Measurable, defensible, presentable proof. Until you can produce it, your perception does not count as information, it counts as mood. This is the quiet humiliation you have lived inside for years. You are asked to translate something instantaneous and exact into a language built specifically to lose it. And when the translation fails, as it always fails, the failure gets recorded as evidence against you rather than against the language. Notice what the realist assumes without ever examining it. He assumes his perspective is the default setting of reality, that what he registers is simply what is there, neutral and complete, and that what you register is decoration laid over the top. He believes he is looking through a clear window at the world. Jung spent his life dismantling exactly this assumption. He observed, again and again, that the human being does not experience the world directly. We attribute to other people and to objects and to entire situations the qualities we cannot recognize in ourselves. We hang our own unconscious material onto the people around us and then react to it as though it were arriving from outside. You have watched this happen in miniature 100 times. The coworker who is convinced the whole office is against him, when the hostility is his own, leaking out of him and coating every face he turns to look at. The partner who accuses you of being cold on exactly the night he went somewhere far away inside himself. They are not lying to you. They genuinely see the thing they are describing. It is simply standing where they put it, on your face instead of in the mirror where it lives. That is projection, not a theory. The most ordinary event in any room you have ever sat in, and Jung put it without mercy. We suppose that what is pleasing or desirable to us is the same to others, and we still attribute to the other fellow all the evil and inferior qualities that we do not like to recognize in ourselves. Sit with what that means for the realist. The reality he insists you accept is heavily authored. The confidence in his voice is not the sound of clear sight. It is the sound of a projection so seamless he cannot feel the seam. So when you argue with someone who is completely certain of his logic, and you can see plainly that he is reacting to something you never created, a phantom assembled from his own denied material, you are not imagining the mismatch. You are watching a person defend a picture and call it a window. Jung went further than most people are comfortable going. He said the world is our picture, and that only childish people imagine the world is what we think it is. The realist's objective reality, the one he keeps demanding you submit to, is the naive one. It is the position of a person who has never once suspected that the lens has a shape. This does not make the realist stupid. Many of them are intelligent, capable, kind. It makes him defended. Realism, practiced this way, is not a method of seeing. It is a method of not having to look. It is a filter precise enough to remove from the visible world everything the person is not ready to feel, and steady enough that he never notices the removal. And the people most committed to measurable proof, you have met them. The ones who demand a spreadsheet for every intuition are frequently the most defended of all. They are reacting blindly to their own unacknowledged emotions while announcing, with real sincerity, that they are the only rational person in the room. But realism is not a window into the truth. It is a highly specific filter. And to understand why your perception frightens them, we have to look at the function you are leading with. You learned early that your reads were not welcome in their raw form, so you became a translator. You took something you knew instantly, the precise emotional truth of a meeting, a relationship, a person, and you laundered it into the only currency anyone would accept: logic, data, a defensible chain of reasoning you reverse engineered after the fact to justify a conclusion you already held. It works sometimes, but it costs you. Every translation is a small act of self-betrayal, a moment where you agree that the thing you actually did, the direct perception, was illegitimate until dressed in someone else's clothes. Here is what the culture never told you. The faculty you were apologizing for is not the absence of thinking. It is a different kind of thinking. Jung mapped the mind as a set of functions, ways the psyche orients itself to experience, and he placed feeling, evaluative feeling, the capacity to weigh what something is worth, alongside thinking as a rational function, not an emotion, not a mood, a mode of judgment, a cognitive instrument that arrives at conclusions by a route that does not pass through argument. When you meet a person and know, in the first 30 seconds, almost exactly what they are worth and what they will eventually do, you are not being irrational. You are running a highly differentiated perception at full resolution. The information is real. The processing is real. What you lack is not accuracy. What you lack is a way to show your work, because the work happened beneath the level where work can be shown. The modern world worships one function above all the others: directed thinking, linear, sequential, defensible, the kind of cognition that builds bridges and writes contracts and wins arguments. It is a magnificent tool. But a culture that worships a single function starves the rest. And the starved functions, in such a culture, do not get called underdeveloped. They get called irrational, emotional, too much. Picture one small moment, a hiring meeting. The candidate is polished, the resume is clean, and everyone at the table is nodding along. But you feel something off, a flatness behind the eyes, a rehearsed quality to the warmth, like a song played from sheet music by someone who has never felt the words. So you say carefully that something does not sit right with you. They ask you why, and you cannot say why. So the room moves on, because the spreadsheet says yes, and the feeling in your chest does not count as data. 6 months later, he is gone, and the wreckage he leaves behind is shaped exactly like the thing you felt in the first 10 minutes and could not put into words. You were not pathologized because you were wrong. You were pathologized because you lead with the function the culture decided to starve. And this is where the grief lives, not in the moments you were proven wrong, but in the moments you were proven right. The mask finally slips, the betrayal finally surfaces, the thing you named 6 months ago finally happens in front of everyone. And you do not feel vindicated. You feel a low, heavy sorrow, because you remember every hour you spent letting them talk you out of your own reality. You doubted the one signal that was working on the authority of people running blind. That sorrow is not weakness. It is the residue of a long argument between individual perception and collective certainty, in which the collective kept winning by sheer volume. You have carried that exact grief and been certain no one else alive could understand it. Right now, people watching this just felt their whole chest go quiet, because someone finally described the thing they have spent their lives unable to explain to anyone. But realism is not a window, it is a filter. And once you understand what you were actually doing all those years, the next question becomes unavoidable. If feeling is a real form of knowing, how does it actually reach the room before anyone speaks? You do not observe a room, you absorb it. There is a difference, and you have felt it your whole life without having the word for it. Other people walk into a space and take readings the way you might glance at a thermometer. You walk in, and the temperature becomes your own. The unsaid tension arrives as pressure in your chest. The grief someone is holding 3 feet away becomes a weight you carry out the door, and halfway home, you realize you cannot say whether the heaviness is theirs or yours, because the line that was supposed to separate the two was never fully drawn. Jung had a precise name for this, borrowed from the anthropologist Lévi-Breuil, participation mystique, a state of unconscious identity in which the boundary between subject and object dissolves and the psyche merges with what it perceives. He described it as a remnant of an older layer of the mind, the layer in which a person and the world were not yet experienced as separate things. In most people, that layer is buried deep, paved over by a firm sense of where they end. In you, it sits close to the surface. The wall between self and other was built thin, or built late, or in some places never finished at all. And that unfinished boundary is the actual mechanism of your gift. Not magic, not an aura, a porousness that lets the room pour straight through you, carrying its real contents past every social performance directly into your body. This is what makes your read so accurate. You are not interpreting signals from a safe distance. You are briefly becoming the thing you perceive and reporting back from inside it. There is a clinical mechanism for what you have been calling intuition, and it is not a mystical broadcast. It is identity. For a moment, you are them. But watch what this costs. She is at a dinner. Across the table sits a charming man, and everyone is enchanted. The stories are good. The timing is perfect. The warmth seems real. And underneath it, she feels a freezing coldness, an absolute wrongness she cannot locate or defend, a sense that something behind the performance does not match the performance at all. So she does what she has trained herself to do. She smiles. She suppresses it. She decides not to ruin the evening over a feeling she cannot prove. She overrides the only accurate read in the room because it cannot produce a receipt. This is why weaponized charm works fastest on the person who feels the most. The same porousness that lets her read him flawlessly also dissolves the boundary he needs dissolved. She does not just see the manipulation, she absorbs the manipulator, takes his version of reality across a border that barely exists, and begins, against her own clear perception, to doubt the cold truth in her chest. The faculty that makes you accurate and the faculty that makes you vulnerable are not two different things. They are the same open door. You cannot wall off the absorption without also losing the sight. And that is the trap the flattery never mentions, the cost folded inside the gift. And this is where the blade turns toward you. Here is the pattern you have not wanted to look at. You keep intuiting the same betrayal, not from one person, from a series of them, 5 different faces wearing the identical wound, as though the world were sending you the same actor in different costumes. You read the danger early every time, and somehow you are always already inside it, drawn with a pull that feels almost magnetic toward the exact dynamic that drains you. You, of all people who can see manipulators across a crowded room, keep finding them in your own kitchen. If you just felt that land, if you have watched the same betrayal find you in 5 different faces and quietly wondered if the common thread was you, write this in the comments. The pattern was mine to see. not as an accusation against yourself, as the first time you looked into the mirror instead of through the window. Others reading this will leave the same words right beneath yours. If your sight is so accurate, why does it never seem to protect you? Because not every perception you have is actual sight. Jung was unsparing about this, and it is the part of him the flatterers leave out. He wrote that the dark characteristics, the inferiorities that make up the shadow, have an emotional nature, a kind of autonomy, and accordingly an obsessive, or better, a possessive quality. The shadow is the disowned material, the rage and need and fear you have refused to look at in yourself, and it does not stay quietly buried. It has its own will. It reaches. The disowned parts of yourself do not vanish when you refuse them. They put on someone else's face. The rage you will not feel becomes the rage you detect, with total certainty, in your friend. The need you have starved becomes the neediness you spot in a partner and recoil from. The fear you cannot hold becomes the menace you sense in a stranger. And every time, it arrives wearing the costume of intuition, indistinguishable from the inside, from real perception. She realizes it one afternoon. The things she had been so sure of, her friend's hidden anger, the resentment she could feel radiating off the woman across the cafe, was her own. Her own suppressed rage, too dangerous to own, quietly relocated into someone safer to accuse. She had not been reading her friend. She had been reading a mirror and calling it a window. The exact error she diagnoses in the realist, she'd been committing in the dark. This is the wound running the faculty. If you can read everyone's shadow and never your own, that blindness is not a gap in the gift. It is the gift turned into a weapon and pointed backward. It is why the same betrayal keeps finding you, because some part of it was always leaving from inside your own house. We attribute to the other fellow all the evil and inferior qualities that we do not like to recognize in ourselves. Jung did not write that sentence about the realist. He wrote it about everyone, about you. Escaping this loop requires something the flattery cannot give you. Not more sensitivity, a different relationship to your own darkness. Before you can trust what you see in others, you have to learn to ask a question that costs something. Not, what is wrong with them? But what part of myself is this person carrying for me right now? That question is the entire turn. It is the difference between an empath who bleeds and an empath who sees. And asking it forces you to look back across the years at how you have been living. Look back at the decade behind you. Count the times you made yourself smaller so that more realistic people would stay comfortable in the room with you. The insights you swallowed. The reeds you filed away unspoken because naming them would cost you the dinner, the job, the relationship, the appearance of being easy to be around. You edited your own bandwidth down year after year, suffocating the very signal that was trying to keep you alive, and at some point you stopped calling it self-betrayal. You called it growing up. There is a quieter version of this that lives in the body. You wake most mornings with a tightness in your chest about something the world has told you is perfectly logical. A good job, a reasonable relationship, a life that looks, on paper, like the correct answer. And every external voice says, be realistic, push through it. This is what stability feels like. But your body keeps treating the situation like a slow poison, because your body is reporting from the one sense the culture taught you to ignore. Jung framed this as a collision between two maps. There is the ego's map, the socially constructed picture of who you are supposed to be, the role, the persona, the adapted self that the world rewards, and there is the self, the deeper center, which has its own compass and its own sense of where your life is actually meant to go. When you abandon the self's compass to follow the ego's map, the world calls it maturity. The psyche calls it a one-sided life. And a one-sided life sustained long enough does not feel like peace. It feels like a slow draining of vitality you cannot explain to anyone, because on paper nothing is wrong. That tightness in your chest is not anxiety to be medicated away. It is the self's compass rejecting the ego's map. It is the part of you that did not consent to the dimming, filing its report in the only language it has. You believe the tightness is a flaw in you to be fixed. You believe the exhaustion means something is broken and needs repair. It is the reverse. That tightness is the one part of you that refused the bargain everyone else signed. It is not the symptom. It is the last honest witness you have left. You bought safety in the ego's world, and the currency you paid was your own aliveness. For a while, the exchange seemed fair. It does not seem fair anymore. That is not a breakdown. That is the bill arriving. And when you finally stop dimming yourself to stay believable, something else wakes up. The change, when it comes, does not arrive as a louder gift. It arrives as a boundary. You stop absorbing the room. You begin, for the first time, to observe it. You still feel the weight, the tension, the cold gap behind the smile, all of it as vivid as ever, but it no longer crosses into you and becomes you. You feel the field without becoming the field. The drop of ink holds its shape in the water. You are still porous enough to perceive everything, and finally separate enough to remain yourself while you do. Jung called the work that produces this individuation, and at its core sits a single demanding act, the withdrawal of projections. He wrote that the supreme aim of the opus psychologicum, the psychological work, is conscious realization, and that the first step is to make oneself conscious of contents that have hitherto been projected. You take back the heavy material you had comfortably hung on other people. You stop outsourcing your own darkness and then perceiving it in their faces. This is not a loss of feeling. It is feeling that has finally been cleaned. He was blunt about why it matters. Emotional relationships, he said, are relationships of desire, tainted by coercion, and it is essential to withdraw these projections in order to attain to oneself and to objectivity. Your old merging, the bleeding heart fusion you mistook for love, was never clear sight. It was desire wearing the mask of perception. True objectivity, the kind you always wanted, only becomes possible on the far side of taking the projections back. And this is the part that reframes the whole journey. Once you know who is doing the seeing, the sight becomes trustworthy for the first time. The flame illuminates without consuming the hand that holds it. Watch her now at the end. She meets a new person. She feels the same cold gap she has felt 100 times, the familiar wrongness behind a practiced warmth. But everything around the feeling has changed. She does not doubt herself, because she has already done the work of separating her own shadow from her sight, and she knows this reading is clean. She does not try to fix him, because she no longer needs to be needed. She does not wait for proof, because she has stopped requiring the world's permission to know what she knows. She simply closes the door, quietly, without a case to argue or a wound to nurse. The perception has stopped being a liability and become something she can finally stand behind. So go back to the beginning, the cold you felt before anyone spoke, the gap behind the smile that everyone else agreed not to see. You were not imagining it. You were not too sensitive or dramatic or paranoid. You were the only one in the room willing to feel what was actually there. The work was never to feel less. The work was to learn who was doing the seeing. And once you know that, the thing they spent years calling your weakness becomes the one signal in your life you never have to apologize for again. If something in this named an experience you have carried for years without language for it, that recognition is the work beginning, not ending. Sit with the one question that turns the faculty from a wound into an instrument. The next time you are certain about someone, before you act on the certainty, ask it, what part of myself is this person carrying for me right now? Then notice whether the reading survives the question. The ones that survive are your sight. The ones that dissolve were always a mirror. If this is the language you have been trying to find, subscribe and stay. This is what we do here. We descend into the depths, and we come back with a map. And before you go, tell me one thing in the comments. What did you see early, name out loud, and get punished for, only to watch it come true exactly as you felt it would? Write it down. Someone scrolling these comments needs to find your words and finally understand they were never crazy for seeing it. I will see you in the next one.
Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.